Hello, my name's Abby and I'm the head teacher here at Barcelona Montessori School. I'd like to take a moment today to talk to you about autumn-born children. So that's for children who are born between September and December of every year. We know that there's a lot of questions and maybe some confusion around the school policy relating to autumn-born children. And so I'd like to take a moment to discuss with you, to explain to you how the UK and the Montessori system compare to the Spanish system. I'd like to start by just going back through the 4 planes of development. I'm sure many of you are aware of the 4 planes of development, certainly if you've been to other talks that the school has given. This will be a familiar concept. But just so that we're all on the same page, we will start looking at the 4 planes. So you probably know that Maria Montessori spent a lot of time observing children. She observed hundreds of thousands of children, and she noticed that children generally fall into these 4 planes of development based around their age. The first plane of development she identified was infancy, which is for children aged between 0, or even before they're born, and 6. And what she noticed was that children in the first plane of development, in infancy, are working to gain physical and biological independence. And you've probably heard that we talk a lot about the absorbent mind in that age group, that children just copy things that are going on around them. And they're very interested in processes. And the main goals of the learning environments in infancy are to help children to choose activities and to refine their sensory perceptions. Around the age of 6, just after a child has turned 6, they will begin to enter what is known as childhood. And childhood lasts from age 6 through to age 12. And Montessori noted that children in this plane of development, the second plane, are in a period of mental independence. And if you've been to observe in any of our classrooms, if you compare a children's house classroom for 3 to 6, for those in infancy, and compare it to a childhood classroom, you will notice that children's houses are generally quite quiet environments compared to those in childhood. Our primary classroom for children aged 6 to 12 is quite a loud place, often, and that's because children are in a social plane and they're very interested in working with each other, so you can often hear children talking about different topics. Sometimes parents compare this to an office environment where children are discussing different projects. They might get distracted and then come back to work. And that's because they're interested not so much in the process, but in the end product. They want to work together to build something. And it's a time where they're particularly interested in rules and fairness, more so than they are in infancy, although you begin to see it. So this socialization is different, though, from what we see in infancy, where children often play next to each other and they will play games together. Here we're talking about really working together to build something. After a child turns 12, they enter what Montessori defined as the third plane of development, adolescence. And this is the time of social independence. We all know that adolescence brings with it changes in hormones and puberty, but also that those third plane children become very interested in global socialization and their place in the wider world, not just their local community. And it's a time of financial independence and where vocation and creativity is at its peak. At 18, children or young adults begin to move into the 4th plane of development, known as maturity, which Montessori said ended at age 24. Maybe some of us never get there. But it's a time of spiritual and moral independence. So it's where young adults begin to have their own lives and they become more independent in responsibility and have a sense of purpose. Often they will start their own chosen family. And so these are the 4 planes of development that Montessori identified. And based on these planes of development, she developed her different classrooms that enable an environment that helps these children to develop naturally. So at our school, you will know that there are different classrooms that are developed to reach those children. Those children in the first period, the first part of the first plane of development, of infancy go to nido, an infant community, between the ages of, in our school it's 12 months, but it can actually be much younger. This caters for our children who are aged between 0 and 3 years old. After a child turns 3 and they move into the second half of the first plane of development, they will move into Children's House. Following that, we have our lower primary classrooms, which are designed for children aged 6 to 9, and our upper primary classrooms for 9 to 12. This September, I'm pleased to announce that we will be opening our first lower adolescent program. And following on from that, we aim to open our upper adolescent program from 15 to 18. And we also have running a program for those older students who continue on to university and eventually life. So this is how our classrooms are designed at Barcelona Montessori School, following Maria Montessori's guidance. Next, I'd like to take a moment to talk to you about the UK. I know many of you are not familiar with the British education system and the UK system, so I would like to go through and just talk about the different ages that we have, the school years, and what we call key stages. So our children who are aged from 0 to 3, that are in our infant community and our nido, are in what we call preschool or nursery in the UK. Children's House covers children who are aged between 3 and 6, and in the UK we talk about nursery, so nursery continues, reception, and year 1. In the UK, children actually start school aged 5 rather than 6, and so year 1 is the first year of formal education. Here we're covering 2 key stages, the foundation stage and key stage 1. When children are in year 2, they move into what's known as our primary classrooms, and these are for children aged 6 through to 12. And here again, we're crossing 2 key stages, in fact 3. We have in our lower primary classrooms key stage 1 and 2, and in our upper primary classrooms we have key stages 2 and the very beginning of key stage 3. Because again, in the UK, children move into secondary school aged 11. We have the authorization to have our first year of secondary in with our end of primary key stage 2 students, but we are covering those learning objectives all the way through those 3 key stages. And finally, our adolescent program that will open next year will bridge key stages 3 and eventually 4 and 5, as we will have students who are in what would be year 8, so they join age 12, all the way through to year 13, which is the end of the UK school system. Next, I'd like to talk to you about the Spanish system. So on paper, the Spanish system looks like it fits very well with Montessori. We have our nido, an infant community, and what would be our educación infantil, and the primer ciclo de educación infantil. Our segundo ciclo de educación infantil caters for children aged 3 to 6. Just like Montessori, children didn't enter the primary or elementary classroom until age 6. And there we have our educación primaria, the first, second and third cycles. We are catering for those children in our 6 to 12. Age 12, students enter educación secundaria, and this is our adolescent program. So on paper, it actually looks at the beginning like the Spanish system fits better with Montessori. But I'm going to explain to you one of the difficulties that we have if we follow the Spanish system. And the big difference here comes from academic and calendar years. In the Spanish system, it doesn't work quite like it does in the English system and the British system. Calendar years, as I'm sure you're aware, we're talking about running from January to December, at least here in Europe. And we are using, the Spanish system uses the calendar year to divide students by age groups for schooling. The academic year, as I'm sure you're also aware, runs in Europe from September to August. And it's used by the UK and many countries around the world to divide students into age groups for schooling. So what does this really mean? And I'd like to show you a table here that's been produced by Nuria, who's our coordinator for the early years. And here you can see what happens when we divide students by calendar year compared to when we divide them by academic year. On the left-hand side, you can see the British system. Here we are dividing students by the academic year, and all of our students fit nicely with our Montessori system. They are 3 when they enter the children's house, and they are 6 when they enter primary, and they would then later down the line, although you can't see it on this table, be 12 when they enter the adolescent program. If we follow the Spanish and Catalan system and divide children by the calendar year, we start to see a problem. We have children who are entering children's house early as well as the primary classrooms. Because if we follow the Spanish system, children enter children's house when they are 2, nearly 3, primary when they're 5, and the adolescent program when they are 11, if they are born in the autumn. So this only applies to autumn-born children, because when we're following the Spanish system, children are much younger when they start school. And this doesn't really fit with the 4 planes of development. If we look, Montessori saw the planes of development lasting from 0 to 6, not 5.5 or 5 3/4. And one of the things we often hear from parents is, but my child can write, surely they're ready for primary. Or my child can do maths, surely they're ready for primary. But one of the things that's important to bear in mind is that Montessori planes of development don't refer to academic ability per se. They are more social and emotional developmental processes. So what does this mean for autumn-born children? When we divide by the calendar year, our autumn-born children are the youngest. When you're the youngest, it's generally harder to be the leader. They might be physically smaller because they're not yet in that next plane. And the idea of the December baby or the summer baby in the UK is even more noticeable because children haven't entered the next plane of development. Or if they have, they haven't really finished solidifying the previous plane. So they're only beginning to enter it. This means that for autumn-born children, they don't fit with the Montessori planes of development if we follow the Spanish system. So we're asking them to play catch-up or aim above their natural development. This means that we're often forcing social and emotional maturity, and sometimes children who are forced into this situation may be more easily influenced by older students, which can be particularly problematic when we get into adolescence. Finally, it often means that they will finish school and go to university before they turn 18. And this is important to bear in mind because although children might seem like they are older compared to when they're babies, it's something to bear in mind for later down the line. If we divide by the academic year, what does this mean for autumn-born children? They're generally the oldest in the class. It's much easier for them to be the leader. It fits with Montessori's planes of development. They'll have time to finish maturing before they move on to the next plane of development. And they'll be working within a community of people who are at the same social and emotional level. This means that often they have a better developed sense of their own limits and they're more able to put limits on other people. And more importantly, when they finally finish school and go to university, they are 18. So what does the law say about moving children? In the UK, the decision to move a child ahead a year in school is known as accelerated progression, and if we keep them behind, it's known as grade retention. And unlike in Spain, this is something that is very rare. Education outside of the chronological year group is considered on a case-by-case basis. And it's important to bear in mind that parents can request this acceleration, but the final decision, and more than the final decision, I would also say the responsibility, lies with the school, the head teacher, and the admissions authority of the school. So this is why decisions should be made in the best interests of the child, considering academic ability, but also social, emotional development and any special needs of the child. And as an international school in Spain, we should follow the law for the country in which we are accredited by, which in this case is the UK. So we should be following the UK law. So probably some of you are wondering, how do we deal with children then if they cannot repeat or go ahead a year? In the UK, we talk a lot about differentiation. And differentiation is a very common practice in the UK and in Montessori. Because if you've got students who are all of the same age but of very varying academic abilities, we need to find a way of reaching all of those children. So differentiation refers to the practice of tailoring instruction to meet the diverse needs, abilities and learning styles of students within a classroom. And there are different ways that teachers can differentiate. We can differentiate in terms of what is taught, so the content, how it is taught, which would be the process, and how students demonstrate the learning, which is the final product that they make, and finally, the learning environment. And the learning environment is probably one of the most important areas of differentiation in a Montessori classroom. But also, we talk a lot about the process and the product. And I'm going to give you some examples now. So the first example that I'd like to give you relates to an activity that we use in infant community. And in infant community, we have activities that cover curricular content from 4 months to approximately 3.5 years. But actually, what we are also doing is meeting a lot of the early learning goals, which need to be met by age 5, using these different materials. And here you can see an example of one area of physical development where students need to use a range of small tools, including scissors, paintbrushes, and cutlery. And here you can see a child who is cutting and learning scissor use. This is an activity that you can find in both the infant community and the children's house, because young children need to continue to develop their fine motor skills and begin doing this in the infant community, but finally they finish this process in the children's house, and occasionally into primary we also see this activity. Again, the importance is the environment is social and emotional, not academic, and the differentiation is in the process and the learning environment. Moving on to children's house. In a children's house environment, we typically have activities that cover curricular content from age 2.5 to 7. And this is regardless of what curriculum you are following most of the time. If there are curricular requirements for children of this age, generally speaking, we can find them in the children's house. Year 2, as you might remember, in the UK is for students aged 6 to 7. And here you can see a children's house activity that you may or may not see regularly in a children's house. Often it's an activity that comes out towards the end of the year, and sometimes not at all, because a lot of the time students are not working yet at this level. But for our older students or those who are more capable in our children's house, we find this activity, which is reading words containing common suffixes. And this is meant for students who are able to read and are beginning to learn about the roots and suffixes of different words. I'd like to give you an example of a Year 2 National Curriculum Standard where we solve problems using multiplication, division, using materials, arrays, repeated addition, mental methods and multiplication, and division facts, including problems in contexts. Now, many of you will be familiar with this material, as you will have seen students using this golden beads material in class. Often they begin by collecting the different quantities in order to make big numbers. But this material has diverse purposes. We can also use it to make addition, multiplication, subtraction and division problems and help students begin to solve these. Again, the differentiation is in the process and the learning environment, and the importance of the environment is social and emotional, not academic. So we are differentiating for the needs of the children based on where they are. You can also see here another activity that is for Children's House, and this is the racks and tubes. This is to teach students about division, and a lot of the time you will see this activity in the primary classroom as well. It's present in the Children's House and it's available, but it's not often introduced simply because most students aren't ready. And the same goes for the fractions activities. Both of these are designed to allow students who are ahead in maths to carry on, but they don't really become a curricular requirement until primary. So many students continue to work on other skills. Then when we move into the primary classroom, towards the end of our primary classroom, you can see here that we have an activity for learning algebra. The early Key Stage 3, which is years 7, 8 and 9, students need to understand and use standard mathematical formulae to rearrange formulae to change the subject. Now here you can see that students are actually even solving algebraic equations, and this is curricular content that's present in our 9 to 12 classroom. Another example, and I'm talking a lot about maths simply because I'm a maths teacher and I find it easier to explain, but also because a lot of English language differentiation occurs on an individual basis with the students, and it's harder to show you the different materials that relate directly to that curricular content. So here, Key Stage 3 algebra, one of the national curriculum requirements is to work with coordinates in all 4 quadrants. And this is an activity that's found for students in primary and also can be used in our secondary classrooms when they need it. Again, the importance of the environment is social and emotional, not academic, and the differentiation is in the process and the learning environment. So we often get questions from parents about the academic year. What academic year should my child be in? What effect will this have on them later? And what happens if we move schools or something changes? So we asked the Consorci d'Educació, because they are the people who are in charge of this. And they told us that a child enrolled in an international school should follow that system. So we should be following the system of the UK. If a child moves to a local school, perhaps a concertada or a public school, it probably means that that child will be enrolled in the year that corresponds to their age, unless otherwise requested by the parents and authorised by the Consorci d'Educació. So this means that if your child is enrolled in our school and they are in year 1, and next year they are an autumn-born child in year 1, if they were to move to another school, they would probably move into what would be primaria, unless you request otherwise. But again, everything is, they will also consider students on a base-by-base system, so on a case-by-case system, and therefore you can discuss that with the new school once you enroll. One of the things that we notice is it's better to move a child up later than move them up earlier, only to repeat. And this is particularly important when we're considering gifted and talented students, or those who have been assessed as altas capacidades. A lot of the time, students who are assessed as having altas capacidades when they're young, these altas capacidades may well occur in one particular area, but not normally across the board. So normally, students who are really gifted in maths might be more at a normal level in terms of their social and emotional development, or even their language development. And for this reason, it's good to be able to differentiate and offer that child more advanced mathematical activities, because if we move them up later and make them repeat, it affects their confidence. It affects how they see themselves compared to where they should be. Another thing that we've noticed is that children who genuinely are working above their age bracket will generally move themselves up and start working with older students when they are ready and once they're in the primary classroom. So we think it's better to wait rather than move a child up in Children's House into primary early, and perhaps we can look at adjusting their academic year later. Other questions? I want to share a quote with you from Maria Montessori. Growing is a succession of acquisitions of independence. At first they're physical acquisitions, teeth, walking, language, and each comes at the right time if the child is allowed to live naturally. For nature has assigned a definite order for these acquisitions. So this is important to bear in mind, that each acquisition of independence comes at the right time when a child is allowed to live naturally, and the purpose of our classrooms is to allow children to do that. If we try to rush this, we're putting a pressure on a child that will move them outside of their natural growth system. Parents often ask us, can children move up mid-year? Obviously, if we're following the child, we have to say yes. Of course they can move up mid-year. And one of the things you will notice is that move-ups from Nido and infant community happen throughout the school year. And this is because we're working on a one-to-one basis with children. For the sake of us, we tend to put these transitions regularly throughout the year at 3 different points, simply because it's much easier for us to manage meetings and various other administrative issues that come with that. An important point to remember, though, is that when children are moving from the children's house into primary, not only is this a move from a different classroom, it's also a move into a different plane. And it's into a plane where socialisation is extremely important. So a move up mid-year here is possible, but it might not always be the best option, and I'm going to try to explain why. If we move a child up individually into a social environment where they are not quite in the same point of development as the other children in the class, they are not naturally going to fit into a group in that plane. So whilst they can gain the presentations and the knowledge of the primary classroom, they will not necessarily be part of a group. So if we're moving children from children's house into primary, we prefer to move them as a group. And finding a time where a group of children are all ready to make that transition into primary, it can be more challenging. This is why we tend to move children in September, simply because it's the easiest way for them to fit into a group. So it is possible, but it's not always the best option. The other thing that we hear from parents is, oh, but my child is so big, they're complaining about the fact that they're in a class with babies. They're complaining that they have 3-year-olds in the class who are not as big as them. And it's really important to remember that children need to outgrow their environment and that this is completely natural. And it happens in schools all over the world. If a child is outgrowing their environment and rejecting it, it shows that they are ready or beginning to become ready to be in the next environment. And curiosity for older children is completely natural. Part of outgrowing their environment is becoming the leader and being the big one in the class. And it's an important process that children need to go through. Often when children are not yet 6 when they enter the primary classroom, they will not have had time to be the leader in that class. And it's an important moment for those children in order to develop confidence. So I'd like to finish by sharing a quote with you, which is slightly blocked by my face, so I apologise. But education is a natural process carried out by the child and is not acquired by listening to words, but by experiences in the environment. And this was said by Maria Montessori. And I think it's important when we think about the students in our classes that the environment plays such a role in their education. So it's not the presentations that are given by the teachers and the learning that happens because they're taught by a primary school teacher, but it's everything that goes on in these environments. And these environments are very different. And if you haven't, I strongly encourage you to come and observe your child in their environment. And if your child is working towards that transition from infant community to children's house or children's house to primary, I strongly encourage you to sign up to come and observe the older class, because you will see the difference in those environments and it will give you a good idea of where your child is at and whether they are ready to make that transition. So, thank you very much for your attention. Again, please come and sign up to do an observation in your child's current and future class. And I hope this has explained a bit about the school's position. I imagine that everybody has questions about their individual child, and so I strongly suggest you speak with your child's guide when you have the next meeting and talk a lot about your individual child's progress and where they are and where they might be in the next few months or years. Thank you for your attention. Have a nice day.